When people think survival horror, usually the first game they think of is Resident Evil. But the truth is, there were a few to come before it. You could go as far back as 1992's Alone in the Dark, but we're going to talk about Clock Tower. The very first Clock Tower game released in 1995 for the Super Famicom, a year before the original Resident Evil. The game would only release in Japan and we would never see it in North America. As for the plot of the 1995 Clock Tower game, you play the role of an orphan named Jennifer. You and your friends who are also orphans have been adopted by a new family. Sounds like a nice warm story, but it turns ugly quickly, trust me. People start dying and it's up to you to figure out what's going on. The game takes a point and click approach, and I'm not really a fan of that, but that's okay, some people are. Throughout the game, you are stalked by the Scissor Man, a man that follows you with a giant pair of scissors ready to cut you up in 1,000 pieces. You'll need to run and hide to get rid of him when he appears. So in 1997, we in North America finally get a Clock Tower game. It's actually the sequel to the 1995 game, but to us, it was the first game. The game was directly following something that we here in America never got. Now, spoilers are coming up, so turn the video off if you don't want to hear them. The game takes place after the events of the 1995 game, with Jennifer being the only survivor. And guess who reunites with her? The Scissor Man. He's even more terrifying now that he went from 16 bits to 32. It once again continues on with the point and click system, and I just feel like this game could have been so much more if you had more control over your character. The voice acting isn't very good, but it's not nearly as bad as the original Resident Evil game. As I mentioned, the 1997 game picks up shortly after the Famicom game. Jennifer is receiving treatment now for those traumatic events by the Scissor Man. So 3 words sum up this game: run, hide, and pray. You have no option to fight the Scissor Man one-on-one, and you must hide and pray he doesn't find you. Now, every hiding spot doesn't work, especially if you use the same one continuously. I do have a small issue with the game, and it's the dialogue. There is way too much, and for some of the dialogue, they didn't even record voiceover. It hasn't aged well, but if you're wanting to be scared, it can definitely do that for you. Clock Tower would come to an end in late 2002 with Clock Tower 3, which didn't even have the Scissor Man in it. To me, that's the only thing that makes me think of the series. It's known for the Scissor Man. In 2016, a game by the name of Nightcry released for PC. It was a Kickstarter originally named Project Scissors, and it was made by many of the original team members who made Clock Tower. And crazy enough, the killer carries around a large pair of scissors. Even though it's not technically Clock Tower, this is the closest we'll probably get to a newer Clock Tower game at the moment. If you happen to see the 1997 PS1 Clock Tower game, I recommend it for hardcore survival horror fans. If that's not your thing, you'll probably hate it and say it's garbage. You're not into it. You'll say it didn't age well, and it did not age well. But if you're a fan of this genre, I think you'll like it. Play the game and explore every bit of the screen. And don't go looking for the Scissor Man, because he'll find you. A Nightmare on Elm Street released in October of 1990 for the NES. Yes, for the final time, it's NES, not NES.
Play Dr. Mario on Game Boy or NES.
Kirby's Adventure on NES.
Goodbye. Look at me. Look at Mother. Goodbye. Your case is dismissed. Yes, you have no case.
Anyway, the video game was published by LJN. Now, LJN doesn't necessarily have the greatest reputation, but I've heard some say that this is the greatest game that they've ever made. Jaws doesn't get the love it deserves. So straight from the manual it says, it's up to you and your remaining friends to search Elm Street for his scattered bones, his meaning Freddy, and throw them into the high school furnace. If you can just stay awake long enough, you just might end Freddy Krueger's reign of terror for good. This was an NES game I grew up with, but never understood what to do or where to go. Playing many years later, I now know what to do, but where to go is still the question. You start outside in the neighborhood of Elm Street. Up top you see 4 different meters, which by the way the game allows 4 players if you have the 4 score. Head right jumping over bats and snakes with the A button, and if you want you can punch them with the B button. Who would be afraid of Freddy when you have a kid roaming the neighborhood gutsy enough to punch a snake in the freaking face? Continue along the side-scrolling neighborhood until you see a house that looks like you can enter. Once you enter these levels, you get many different enemies and a bone count on the display at the top of the screen. It tells you how many bones remain in that area. Collect them all so you can leave and continue. You can go through houses, the graveyard, and much more. You should always also keep your eye on your sleep meter. If you stay still for too long, you'll become more sleepy. Cups of coffee can be found as well, but it only slows down the meter. No matter what, you'll eventually fall asleep. And that's where you run into Freddy. The enemies get very creepy once you doze off. I mean, come on, a spider with Freddy's head. What's nice is, when we are in a dream, we can do things that we could never do in real life. And that works to our advantage in this game. You can collect 3 different special powers to use in the dream world, and they will assist you in defeating whichever form of Freddy you come up against. Any of these are better than the jump and punch you have in the real world. When it's time for Freddy, the music will slow down and play the classic tune, 1-2, Freddy's coming for you. This terrified me as a kid. I used to pause the game because I was afraid what would happen when the music ended. Speaking of the music, it's great. I always say, a game must have a great soundtrack, and this soundtrack is killer, pun definitely intended. The controls are excellent for an NES game. It's just a really good game. It gets harder as you progress, but that's what games are supposed to do. This last time I played it, I finally beat it, and I would be lying to you if I said I didn't want to put the game in a dream with Freddy Krueger for eternity. But if you take a break and go back, you'll appreciate it. The only bad thing I'd say about the game is how the boss battles have a health bar, but you don't get one. This was super annoying and by far the biggest issue of the game. The ending of the game leaves you with a bit of a cliffhanger because, you know, just like Michael and Jason, Freddy doesn't die. So to sum up my review, here is a 10 count of what I thought of the game. 1, 2, that was my review. 3, 4, more can play with the 4 score. 5, 6, a health bar is what needs fixed. 7, 8, the music is great. 9, 10, I'd play it again. Resident Evil, also known as Biohazard, released March 22nd, 1996, and was developed by Capcom. I remember getting this game when I was 6 years old. I went to our local game store, and my mom let me pick out any game I wanted. So I picked Resident Evil. And it came with a strategy guide. Yeah, that's right. I was 6, and my mom bought me Resident Evil. But that's okay, because she's awesome like that, and I think I turned out okay. I could never beat the game though at 6 years old. Using the book, I got pretty far, and I just knew what I was playing was special. If the start screen doesn't get you pumped, I don't know what will. Selecting the new game option and hearing the voice say,
Resident Evil.
it's just epic. I don't know. Maybe you have to be a horror fan, whether it be movies or games. I know personally for me, survival horror is my favorite. So at the start we get a live action intro. I can't recall any game really doing this before this game, but I mean, it's okay. It makes you feel like you're watching a movie, and it's setting the story. The biggest part of the game takes place inside the mansion, and it's where the first cutscene of the actual game takes place. Depending on what character you choose, you will see a slightly different first cutscene. I'm not here to spoil a whole lot, but come on. It's been over 20 years. Shame on you if you haven't experienced this. But come on, are you really gonna trust a guy who wears sunglasses indoors at night. It's just a red flag. So let's get it out of the way. The voice acting is horrendous. The lines feel like they're being delivered hard, and by that, I mean these voice actors are delivering their lines in dramatic fashion. For example, something as simple as saying, "Hey, don't open that door," turned into,
"Where's Chris?"
"Stop it! Don't open that door!"
It's just not good. What's funny is a famous line in the game is when Jill's almost crushed, but Barry comes to the rescue. He says that she's almost a Jill sandwich.
It's too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Who comes up with that? In Capcom's game Dead Rising, this is a restaurant within the mall named Jill Sandwiches, and it's hilarious. As I mentioned earlier, you have the option of choosing different characters, and your option is Chris or Jill. There are differences. If you choose Chris, the game is harder, and you get less inventory slots, but he can take more hits. If you choose Jill, you get more inventory slots, but can take fewer hits. Jill also gets a lockpick, which comes in handy since Barry calls her the master of unlocking.
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
I'm telling you, the dialogue it's terrible. But Chris comes with a lighter, and since he doesn't have a lockpick, he has to find little keys to open drawers and stuff, and it's just complicated, so I prefer playing as Jill. The game takes some critical shots because of its camera angles and controls, but I think it adds to the survival horrorness. Yes, I just made up my own word, horrorness. And also, having limited saves gets the game criticism. But I love the door animations. It's super eerie and suspenseful, wondering what's on the other side of the door. Safe rooms have item boxes where you can empty your inventory to free up space and come back later for an item you put away. Which leads me to, the Japanese developers made games harder for Americans due to renting games at rental stores. They didn't like people renting the game, then beating it so quickly and returning it, so they made them more difficult. So they removed things from the game like auto aim, they eliminated some ink ribbons, which are what you use to save your game. So you had fewer saves, and you almost had to deal with this. They almost made it to where each item box was not connected. So like if you put a gem away in the item box on the second floor, it won't be in the item box on the first floor. I know it's more realistic that way, but I'm so glad that didn't happen. That would have been terrible. On March 22nd, 2002, exactly 6 years after Resident Evil released, a remake of the game released for GameCube, and it's a breath of fresh air. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the original is terrible. It has good features and bad ones, just like any game would. Take a look at this side-by-side comparison between the remake and the original, and tell me that's not like a breath of fresh air. The graphics, the voiceover, the environment is so much better. I think it's best, though, to play the original Resident Evil, then play the remake to truly appreciate it. In 2015, a high-definition version of the remake was released, and I recommend this version over the GameCube version. Same game, just looks better. Resident Evil was such an iconic game, and still to this day defines survival horror for me and a lot of people. Walking through that dim-lit mansion with the thunderstorm raging outside, and not to mention every hall is lurking with zombies and jump scares. If you haven't, go back to where it all started, play both versions, and enter the survival horror.
3 STARS members left now. Captain Wesker, Barry, and myself. We don't know where Chris is.
I've always been a huge fan of the PlayStation 1, and I've always been a fan of horror games. My love for the PS1 is pure nostalgia. and for some reason being scared sends off this adrenaline that I kinda like. If you love the combination of both, you can still experience it through Puppet Combo. I feel if you're a horror game fan, you've heard of that name before. Puppet Combo puts out some of the scariest games you will ever see, and they are usually styled to the PlayStation 1. Some titles from Puppet Combo are Babysitter Bloodbath, The Night Ripper, Power Drill Massacre, Stay Out of the House, Feed Me Billy, and Nun Massacre. Out of these titles I have mentioned, Nun Massacre is the one I can't get through. And I'm not ashamed to say that it terrifies me. If you play it, tell me you didn't fall out of your seat. But I want to talk about Murder House. I feel this is the best story-driven game to come from Puppet Combo. I won't spoil what happens, but I will set the story up. The prologue takes place in 1985. You are a young boy named Justin, at the mall preparing to get your photo taken with the Easter Bunny. Now, side note, you will never find a photo of me as a kid with Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. I was always scared, I don't know why, but it is what it is. Other kids have this fear too. I don't know. But in the game, as Justin, you get your photo and some time passes by and you wake up from a photo booth and realize that the mall has closed down for the night. Everyone, including your mom, seem to have gone home. However, roaming the dark-lit mall, you soon realize the Easter Bunny didn't go home. He is carrying around a sickle. That's right, an Easter Bunny is carrying a freaking sickle. You play out the events, and after the intro credits, we are now in the year 1988. A local news crew is preparing to film at the house that belonged to the man that was wearing the bunny suit. His name is Anthony Smith. He went by the name the Easter Ripper. In March of 1979, he took a seasonal position as an Easter Bunny at a mall and started abducting children. The news crew is made up of Gary, who comes across as that jerk of a boss that has a terrible mouth. And there's Dana, she complains a lot. There's Tom, the cameraman, who doesn't have much of a personality but seems to be a nice, quiet dude. And the main character who you play as, Emma. Emma is basically the lackey. She's ordered around by her boss, Gary. As the game progresses, you learn the Easter Ripper still lurks the house and is going to make you pay for trespassing. You will be participating in an Easter egg hunt, but must be cautious because while you hunt for eggs, the Easter Ripper is hunting you. Murder House is one of those games that allow you to roam and find certain pieces to advance the game. For example, you need to open the washing machine door, but need a crowbar to do so. You'll first need to get the flashlight to find the crowbar in the dark, then use the crowbar to open the washer and retrieve the item that goes somewhere else. I call this a puzzle piece game. Murder House does offer a save feature, but in order for you to save, you'll need to find pencils lying around the house to write down your progress. The only save can be found in the door under the stairs. Originally, I played through Murder House on PC, and I'm decent on a keyboard, but I'm a controller guy. Just recently, Murder House became available for the PlayStation 4, 5, Xbox One X, Xbox One, and the Nintendo Switch, and I recently played through on my PS5, and noticed some slight differences. For example, the first time I played, it was over a year ago, and now an extended ending exists. If graphics, though, are your number one thing when it comes to gaming, you won't like this. But I want to tell you, if graphics are your priority, then you're doing it all wrong. It's all about fun. Don't turn a game down because it looks like it was made 25 years ago. Embrace the PlayStation 1 era and enjoy the story. The fact that the Easter Ripper can appear at any time during your egg hunt is definitely frightening. Jump scares are almost certain, and if there's one thing that Puppet Combo knows, it's the jump scare. Until Dawn released in August of 2015 for Sony's PlayStation 4. I remember reading about this game way before its release in Game Informer, and I was pretty excited for it. You don't see very many horror titles anymore, and I think that was a big reason that the hype was the way it was for Resident Evil 7. But Until Dawn is a completely different style of game than Resident Evil. It's an interactive game. The game starts with 10 close friends hanging out at their winter getaway location. The friends consist of Mike and his girlfriend Emily, Matt, Jessica, Sam, Ashley, Chris, Josh, and his 2 twin sisters Beth and Hannah. The location is actually owned by Josh, Hannah, and Beth. So here's where the story gets its reasoning. Hannah has the hots for Mike. That's right, the hots. Well, they thought it would be a fun idea to trick her into thinking Mike was also interested. So a fake note was written for Hannah, supposedly from Mike, telling her to meet him in the guest room at 2 a.m. Well, as 2 a.m. nears, everyone hides to see what would actually happen. Hannah shows up and starts to take her top off for Mike. She then hears Jessica start laughing, and everyone comes out and she takes off running out of embarrassment. I'll also mention that Sam wanted no part of the prank, and her sister Beth and brother Josh had no idea. You take control of Beth and have to chase down your sister, who ran deep into the woods at 2 a.m. During this part, Hannah and Beth both fall off a cliff being chased by a mystery man and fall to their deaths. Fast forward a year later. Everyone is invited by Josh to come out again. Some things have changed since last year. Mike and Emily have split. Mike is now dating Jessica, Emily is now dating Matt, and obviously the twins are no longer around. Needless to say, Emily and Jessica don't get along anymore, so Mike and Jessica are headed out to stay in the guest cabin. Secretly, Emily still wants Mike, and if you do certain things in the game, you can call her out on it when you play as Matt. Chris has a thing for Ashley. It's basically high school in a cabin. That's basically what it is. Eventually, a masked psycho shows up and puts the group of friends in situations similar to the Saw movies. I like this game because as you progress, it has everything from a slasher style of horror movies, even a paranormal style, so there's something here for everyone. Throughout the game, you can find little tiki totems that can show you the future, and certain totems show you a death that could occur if you don't make the right decisions. I must inform you, you can find twin clues throughout your journey in the game. Search every location good because you don't necessarily need to find them all, but they're very important come time for the end of the game. This game is very similar to games like Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls, and Indigo Prophecy. It's like you're watching a movie, but you're in control of the decisions made to advance it. Don't get me wrong, it's not just cutscenes, you do control a lot of the gameplay. You need to be on your toes because quick-time events happen out of nowhere. Until Dawn is one of those games I try to play once a year. The best time being in January or February because it's cold out, depending upon where you're from, and it just sets the mood for the game. I don't have very many problems with the game other than you're often reminded of the butterfly effect, in which any choice of action by the player may cause unforeseen consequences later on. That's fine, but I don't think there are as many differences to the story as they make it seem. Other than people dying, but the story plays out the same every time. Not very many, but few decisions may bite you later, but not enough to drastically change the direction of the story. The deaths are the big thing here. Obviously the goal is to save everyone, and it's not very hard to do. I think this is a very fun game, and the story is awesome. It's done in episodes, and even does a little recap before the next part continues on. Personally, I think all the characters are pretty cool, except Emily. Play the game and you'll understand why. I think this is a good game, and I give it a 4 out of 5. Like I said, I wish the story changed direction based upon the decisions, but the story stays, and the only thing that changes is who you have alive at the end. So come January or February, sit down, around 10 p.m., cup of hot chocolate, play Until Dawn, till dawn. I'm a huge fan of horror movies and games, and had this game referred to me by my cousin and uncle. They previously had played the game multiple times and enjoyed it. At first glance, this game looked good. The gameplay is in the style of a 3D side-scroller. It is considered a horror game, and even though it has its jump scare moments whether you're hiding or running, it really didn't seem to faze someone like me. I've played the scariest before, and I'm not saying that it wouldn't scare the average player, but I'm kinda ruined when it comes to that. all the horror games I've played, it's gotta be absolutely horrifying to make me jump. Anyways, you play as Mono, and quite early on you free a girl named Six. Six becomes your sidekick for the rest of the game. She is being held captive by a masked man with a shotgun. One of the biggest things for me in a game is how long does it take to get started. Little Nightmares 2 doesn't waste any time getting into the action. Each section of the game you are dealing with someone or something. The masked shotgun man is only the start. You eventually end up in a school with a teacher that can extend her neck to great lengths. Not only is she a problem, but so are her students. From there you enter the hospital, where you deal with mannequin-like patients and the doctor. The doctor can climb on the ceilings, but eventually ends up roasting in the incinerator. The main villain of the game is the spectral Thin Man. The Thin Man emerges from a TV and captures Six, leaving you to rescue her. Eventually, you have your showdown with the Thin Man and defeat him using powers similar to his. Once you meet back up with Six, she has turned into a creepy giant. Six becomes very disturbed when you damage the music box that she protects. After completely destroying the music box, Six returns to her normal form. Once reaching the end of the game, Mono and Six must escape the giant jello-like flesh and eyes. One final jump is to be made and Six will catch you by the hand in midair, but after an eye-to-eye encounter, she drops Mono to live forever with the flesh below. We then see Mono sitting in a chair as time goes by. Days, months, years. Mono over time takes the form of the Thin Man. This reveals that Mono becomes the actual Thin Man. Roll the credits. Now, if you collect all glitching remains, you will be treated to a small after-credits ending. You see Six, who has just escaped through the TV with a growling, hungry stomach, setting up the events of the first game, Little Nightmares. So it turns out that Little Nightmares 2 seems to be a prequel to the first game that released in 2017. Six is the main character in the first title, and the special ending of the second game sets up the first game where Six deals with hunger. Overall, I enjoyed the game and played through it in one whole sitting. Time flew by as I progressed through the game because I had fun. At first, I would get frustrated by how the game would slow down when you're being chased, but then I realized it's called Little Nightmares. Have you ever been chased in a dream? In all the dreams that I'm being chased, I'm moving at the speed of a snail. Little Nightmares 2 wants you to feel like you are indeed in a nightmare. At one point in the game, you can get stuck looping through doors. You go through one and come out the other across the hall. The way to know the proper path is to listen to the music. Whichever door you can hear the music the loudest, that's the way to go. I like that. It actually reminded me of the Lost Woods in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Overall, I recommend this game to all gamers. It has an atmosphere of its own, and it does it well. Across the board, Little Nightmares 2 has positive ratings, receiving a 9.25 out of 10 from Game Informer and an 82 out of 100 on Metacritic. Resident Evil Zero was a brilliant idea for Capcom to dig deeper into the origin story of the original Resident Evil. This prequel released November 12, 2002, exclusive to the Nintendo GameCube. However, Resident Evil Zero began as a project to be released on the Nintendo 64 in 1998. Using a cartridge format for the game gave the development team some problems, with one of those problems being memory storage. Eventually it got pushed back and was rebuilt for the Nintendo GameCube. I love that footage exists out there of what the Nintendo 64 version was to look like. Resident Evil Zero used the same mechanics as the 2002 remake of the first Resident Evil game, which I was a huge fan of. I usually don't mind prequels if they're done right, and I love where this one begins and where it ends. The STARS Bravo team is sent to investigate bizarre murders in the Arklay Mountains. The Bravo team's helicopter experiences engine failure and crashes into the forest. The Alpha team lost contact with them and was sent out to find them. So this is where the Alpha team gets chased into the mansion during the opening events of Resident Evil 1. After the crash, Rebecca Chambers, a Bravo team officer, is searching the area when she comes upon a train. She investigates only to find the passengers and crew are now infected zombies. She eventually runs into a newly introduced character named Billy Cohen. Billy is a former second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps and was wrongfully blamed for killing 23 people. Billy was to be executed, but the van transporting him crashed in the area and he escaped. I like the team of Rebecca and Billy throughout this game. I myself just wasn't a huge fan of controlling both characters all the time. It felt like a hassle. I would have preferred having different segments with them, similar to Jill and Carlos in Resident Evil 3, or even Leon and Ada in Resident Evil 2. But I get it. They wanted to try something new, and it wasn't horrible, but for me, it was always a pain having to worry about the health of two characters. It's kind of like you're babysitting them, you know? I just didn't want a consistent partner. I don't want to spend any more time on the story. I mostly want to talk about my thoughts of the gameplay itself. Controls, loved them. Just like the Resident Evil 1 remake. Getting rid of the item boxes though, that was a genius idea. In Resident Evil 0, if your inventory is full, no more running halfway across the map to drop off an item in the item box. You can simply drop whatever it is on the ground and come back for it later. With the game only giving you 6 inventory slots per character, you'll be dropping stuff off constantly. This should have been the way going forward. So convenient, drop anything, anywhere. I love the giant church bat, what a cool boss. It just needed better camera angles to help the player out and to show off the awesome looking bat. The worst thing you could ever come across in this game though is the humanoid leeches. Don't waste your ammo on these things, they seem indestructible. Just dodge them the best you can and hope for the best. But there are some familiar enemies here, like the hunters and the giant spiders. You'll find plenty of ammo to deal with these guys, but every time I found healing items, I usually had to use them. I guess that's a sign for a good challenge. I do feel Resident Evil 0 was a good challenge, and this game, more than any other Resident Evil, makes you use your brain. Now I know puzzles are a staple in Resident Evil, but managing you and your partner's inventory, sharing health items / ammunition, and which weapon to keep and which to leave behind, it can be a bit stressful. You gotta use the brain. This isn't a Resident Evil title to just jump into for those who are new to the series. This is a challenge for those who are experienced and have fought their way through the mansion, RPD, and streets of Raccoon City. As I mentioned earlier, I enjoyed the team of Rebecca and Billy. There isn't a lot of dialogue between the two when you think about it. Instead, they work together strategically, and it feels like they're creating a bond as you play on. Many fans in the Resident Evil community wanted more from Billy, like a possible return in a future game. But I like where his story ends. A wrongfully blamed man is now free and goes his separate way to live his life after thanking Rebecca. The game ends with Billy and Rebecca overlooking the Spencer Mansion where the events of Resident Evil 1 are happening. Rebecca, as we know, in Resident Evil 1 shows up during Chris's story in the mansion, and her troubles are far from over. But they go their separate ways. Resident Evil 0 is a beautiful game, with a beautiful soundtrack. But unfortunately, I only find small parts of this game memorable. It has nothing to do with these characters. It's more so missing big events. Other than the bat and the final boss, the rest of the boss battles come off as bland. The reason I remember the final boss so well is because of the anxiety I feel trying to fight it while Rebecca slowly turns multiple valves to open the roof to kill the creature. You have to keep it away from her as well. It's definitely an underrated game. I wouldn't say it's up there with the best that Resident Evil has to offer, but for the diehards, the prequel story going straight into the first game, that's just awesome. Resident Evil 0 felt oddly enough new, but also familiar. In the end, I enjoyed my playthrough. The story is what stuck out to me the most. Seeing William Birkin, Wesker, and Rico in cutscenes uncovering more of the story that we all came to know and love, That was the best part for me. Do you remember the old Resident Evil games? They were pretty awesome. Take that awesomeness and add freaking dinosaurs, and you have yourself an epic game. With that being said, Dino Crisis released July 1st, 1999, developed by Capcom for PlayStation, Dreamcast, and Microsoft Windows. Dino Crisis released just months before Resident Evil 3, so you see the gameplay in the style of Resident Evil 2 and 3. I know what you may be thinking. How can a game where dinosaurs are the enemies be as terrifying as Resident Evil? Take my word for it, it's got all the jump scares you need. The story takes place on a fictional island set in the future, at the time, 2009. You learn some freaky stuff is going on at this research facility. A man by the name Dr. Edward Kirk is leading a secret weapons project with the facility. Here's the creepy part. He was reported dead in 2006. So the secret operation raid team sends 4 agents, Regina, Gale, Rick, and Cooper, to get Kirk and return him to custody. They arrive by parachute, but bad luck Cooper is blown away and lands deep in the jungle, away from everyone else. Enter the T-Rex. Poor Cooper. Not knowing Cooper has been eaten for lunch, the team continues on with their mission. Once entering the facility, you quickly learn things aren't right. Guards have been torn apart, fences have been ripped open, and the environment is starting to get pretty creepy. Something Capcom has always nailed with the original Resident Evil games were the sounds within your surroundings. It's quiet, and very eerie. They did the absolute same with Dino Crisis. Personally, if a game takes forever to get started, it doesn't take me long to give up on it. I'm the same with movies, but you don't have to worry about that with this game, because you're met with your first dinosaur experience within the first 10 minutes, and on top of that, you don't see it coming. Surviving the night definitely becomes a chore. Let's talk about the characters. Regina is who you control. Rick is probably my favorite character. He has a great sense of humor even though dinosaurs are lurking around every corner. And then we have Gale, who is a complete douchebag. His attitude sucks. But I've covered it multiple times already. It plays exactly like old school Resident Evil. So to me the controls and camera angles are phenomenal. You have the option of 2 different endings, and the endings are decided upon decisions made in the game. This was another feature that appeared in Resident Evil 3. Alright, no more Resident Evil comparisons, I promise. It's just one of those games I don't see fault in, but these reviews and ratings are based upon my opinion and recommendation. And that's why I always say, play it for yourself and base an opinion on it for yourself. Obviously, for the best experience, play in the dark with the volume up, because you want to hear everything. From the ocean to the squealing of a chain link door opening, it's great. This was most likely an attempt at something similar to the very popular Jurassic Park movies, but give me Dino Crisis over Jurassic Park all day. Unfortunately, the series died off after the 3rd installment for Xbox, but everyone usually talks good about Dino Crisis 1 and 2. Dino Crisis even got its own comic book series for a while. I give Dino Crisis a 5 out of 5, and it's definitely something Capcom needs to remaster or just reboot it. Power Drill Massacre released 2015 by Puppet Combo. It's a PC indie survival horror game with graphics to the style of the PlayStation 1. You may look at the graphics and think, this looks terrible, but it's exactly what they were trying to do. It takes place in 1987, which is fitting for the 80s slasher story that it provides. The game opens up with a nice outdoor scene, looking into the mountains as the sun sets. Birds are chirping. It's a very nice intro, it really is. You hear a car radio, it's cutting in and out, and then you hear a loud scream out of nowhere, followed by what sounds to be a car accident. Now it's time to play. Be sure to use headphones while playing to get the best gameplay experience. You play as a girl named Megan, and at this point, it's pretty clear you were definitely in a car accident. However, you weren't alone. As you exit the car, she starts complaining about a headache. And your friend / maybe boyfriend Jeff is laying in the car and he can't feel his legs. Yeah, she's complaining about a headache and Jeff can't feel his freaking legs. Anyway, she tells him not to worry and she'll be back for help. Or will she? Before I go any further, I'll just say these controls suck. They're terrible. I'm not a fan of a keyboard, but I've played better. And when it comes to playing on a keyboard, there's way better controls. These controls, they're just terrible. They're terrible. So you take control of Megan and start looking for help. When you come across an abandoned factory, what do? Turn around and go away? No, you go in, right? Yeah. So you make your way in, the door locks behind you, someone has locked you in, and you're never getting out. From here you walk around the factory finding newspaper articles of people who have gone missing in the area. But your goal is to find 3 keys to attempt an escape. At times you see a little girl running around, and I have no idea why. I don't know if she is trapped just like your character Megan, or is this just something they threw in the game to make you jump? But there's no need for that. Because when you're just walking around minding your own business, that's when you hear it. The sound of pitter-patter. The sound of someone running up on you. This is when you need to run, because the scariest noise you'll ever hear is right behind you. Some psycho starts chasing you with a power drip. When this happens at random, you're just not prepared. There's no way to prepare for this. You most likely die every time because the jump scare is so brutal, you take your hands off the keyboard. So after the very disturbing death screen, guess where they start you? If you said where you left off, bless your heart, because you're wrong. They start you at the entrance of the factory, and you'll have to find all the keys over again if you found any before. There are 2 endings to the game, and unfortunately, both are bad. You can try to leave with the keys as I mentioned, but good luck staying alive that long. If you happen to stay alive that long though, when you leave, the game ends with you chasing this little girl that you've been seeing throughout the game down an endless hallway as the power drill guy is chasing you. The other ending you actually have a better chance at getting. You find his secret area where he lives or whatever, he captures you. That's it. Power Drill Massacre is a very difficult game and should not be played by someone who is afraid of their own shadow. Due to the difficulty and the controls, I'm going to rate Power Drill Massacre a 2 out of 5. It has a small story, but it also lacks a lot. But sometimes the less you know, the better. If you want to attempt the game, I'll leave you with these words of wisdom. Don't get comfortable, especially when you go down the sugar tunnel. Deadly Premonition was developed by Access Games for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. This open-world survival horror game released February 23, 2010. A director's cut version of the game released for PlayStation 3 and Microsoft Windows in 2013. This game I think has a fantastic story and keeps the player interested the entire time. I'm going to keep this a spoiler-free review as I want you to play it for yourself if you haven't. Before I get into the story, I'll just say, from talking to many people on this game, you either enjoy Deadly Premonition or you think it's a stupid game. It currently has the Guinness World Record for the most critically polarizing survival horror game, and I happen to enjoy it. But here's why. The game takes place in Greenvale, Washington, which is a fictional town created for the game. The player follows FBI Special Agent Francis York Morgan as he investigates the murder of an 18-year-old woman named Anna Graham. The murder case is similar to ones happening across the United States. We start off with the opening cutscene and it leaves you thinking, what the heck did I just see? But in the scene, the body of the 18-year-old woman known as Anna has been found. On to the next scene where Francis is driving to Greenvale to try to solve this case. He starts talking to a Zach, but nobody's in the car with him, so he is seemingly talking to himself. He mentions the last case that he was a part of and explains the scar on his face. So the rain is pouring down hard, and Francis is just trying to light his cigarette. The lighter won't light, and he's not paying attention to the road. But when he finally looks up, we get our first glimpse of the Raincoat Killer standing in the middle of the road. This causes Francis to swerve and wreck the car. He gets out of the car, continues to talk to himself, but using that name Zach. But this is where the player finally takes over. The objective of the game is to find and identify the Raincoat Killer. The name comes from an old folklore of the town, that he only kills when it rains. But while trying to solve the case, you'll also need to take care of Francis. You'll need to make sure he isn't tired and he doesn't starve. You'll need to shave, change clothes as well. and you can explore the town of Greenvale by foot or by car. But the car also needs kept up, as it can run out of fuel and need repairs. You earn money by finishing levels and doing minor things. I know, this game sounds like a chore, but honestly it's not that bad. You also need to keep an eye on the clock. At certain times you will need to interview different people that live in the area, and different places you need to go to have operating hours. This is a very realistic way that they made the game. If you don't interview and miss the time, you can be penalized for it. If you need to pass time, Francis can do so by smoking cigarettes. Francis is assisted by Sheriff George Woodman, the Deputy Sheriff Emily Wyatt, and George's assistant Thomas McLean. The game is definitely a survival horror game, but it also has a comedy side to it. The whistling theme song in the game at times seems very out of place, but it's very catchy. It also brings you back to reality, a nice peaceful afternoon in Greenvale. Then when things get serious, the music changes and so does the feel of the game. Weapons in Deadly Premonition come in two forms, melee and firearms. Completing side quests can unlock special weapons. All I can say is sit back and play this game with an open mind. If you do, I think you'll enjoy the gameplay and the story. Something horror and comedy shouldn't mix, and I agree on some levels. But when it comes to this game, I think they do a good job of evening it out. Mainly because of its story, I'm giving Deadly Premonition 3 out of 5 stars. Resident Evil 2, also known as Biohazard 2, released January 21st, 1998, developed by Capcom. Out of the original 3 games, this was one I wasn't very familiar with. I've only played it twice, with the first time being a long time ago and the most recent being this year. Here's a cheap plug, go check it out under my playlist. But anyway, in my opinion, Resident Evil 2 was a lot easier than the first Resident Evil, especially the puzzles. With that being said, I'll just say it doesn't hurt the game at all. It's another very good game. Originally, the game began development in 1996, immediately after Resident Evil 1. The game has many differences to Resident Evil 1, and one of them being the voice acting. It has really improved since the days of Jill Sandwiches and Masters of Unlocking. Another difference in the game is the environment. You get to explore the streets of Raccoon City, the police station, the sewers, and many more locations. Where in Resident Evil 1 it felt isolated since you spent majority of the time inside the mansion. But that's not as bad as it may sound. It's actually an eerie feeling being confined inside a mansion with the dead. Resident Evil 2 introduces 2 new main characters, Leon and Claire. It's obvious Leon is meant to look like Leonardo DiCaprio. With Titanic and Romeo and Juliet being released around this time, I can see why they do this. DiCaprio was a big name and had the spotlight. Claire is the other character, and she is actually the sister of Chris Redfield from the first game. Claire is voiced by Allison Court, who was known for her work on the children's television show The Big Comfy Couch. Probably the biggest feature of this game was offering scenario A and B. For example, you could choose to play as Leon first, then upon clearing the game with Leon, you could select to play Claire B, which is her journey from where she split with Leon in the opening scene. You can do this the opposite way as well, play as Claire first and then Leon. It's been 2 months since the mansion incident, and the virus has spread throughout Raccoon City. What's really cool is Resident Evil 2 and 3 are happening at the same time, but I'll talk more about that in my Resident Evil 3 review. Resident Evil 2 became the fastest selling video game in North America. On the weekend following its release, it sold 380,000 copies and grossed $19 million. It broke previous sales records set by video games Final Fantasy VII and Super Mario 64. On August 12, 2015, it was confirmed that a remake of Resident Evil 2 is already in development. I can't really find anything bad to say about this game. It's another classic. Unless you're one to complain about graphics and the old school Resident Evil controls, there really isn't an issue here. Resident Evil 2 has been called by many as the best in the series, but that's totally up to you. I wouldn't call it my favorite, but it's pretty awesome. And they don't make them like they used to. Silent Hill released in 1999 for Sony's PlayStation. I can't even begin to tell you how many people have tried to tell me that the movie came first. The movie released 7 years after the game. Now let's clear something else up real quick. Many people believe Silent Hill is a location based out of West Virginia. That's partially correct. The movie places Silent Hill in West Virginia, but the video game takes place in Maine. You know, people of the world, West Virginia is a lovely place. Even though the Wrong Turn movies gave a horrible impression of the state and ruined you by never wanting to experience Almost Heaven, West Virginia, that's your loss. Fallout 76 knows what's up. It's really a lovely place. And did I mention we have a legendary myth of a gigantic moth with 10-foot wings and is possibly the cause of 46 people dying? Anyways, he starts Silent Hill by controlling the character named Harry, who is searching for his missing daughter. For a horror game, it definitely has the environment nailed. The fog is so thick you can't see anything in front of you, and you have to wonder what you're going to come across next. And there's just something eerie about the snow falling outside of winter. Yes, it's snow. It's mentioned as snow in the Silent Hill games, but was changed in the film to falling ash. Almost 20 years later, the game is not easy on the eyes, but if you're like me, it shouldn't be an issue. I mean, yes, the character model moves very choppy, but if the game is good, it can be easily overlooked. My biggest issue was running into dead end after dead end. Oh look, I haven't been here yet. Maybe, nope, dead end. It's a game where you're gonna have to explore, fight, and solve puzzles. On my most recent playthrough, I noticed that if you are using a DualShock controller, it will vibrate as Henry's heartbeat, letting you know that your health is low, and you're in danger of dying. I don't know if I just didn't pay attention, or maybe I used the original PS1 controller the other times I've played, but that's pretty cool. I mentioned you have to fight. What exactly are you fighting? I don't know. There's flying creatures, dogs, things that look mutated, but you can't attack them by firearm or melee. Or sometimes the best option is to just run. Silent Hill offers 5 game endings, with one of them being pretty odd and ridiculous. You will get your ending depending upon the actions you make in the game. So many people say that this is the game that defines survival horror and would love a remake, but with the fallout of PT Silent Hills, I don't see it happening. I also see a lot of people either on one side or the other, Resident Evil or Silent Hill. Why not both? These survival horror games are my thing, and while the older ones may not be perfect, this is a good horrific trip to go back and play, depending on how picky you are. When did you hear of the Slender Man for the first time? I was first introduced to this eerie, abnormally tall humanoid through the 2012 indie game Slender the 8 Pages. But before we even get into that, let's rewind and see how this internet monster was created. In 2009, on the Something Awful internet forum, a thread was created for a Photoshop contest where people would take normal photos, but turn them paranormal. A participant who on the forum went by Victor Surge took 2 images of children and added a tall creature in a black suit, kind of lurking in the background. But this man, this thing, had no facial features, and in one photo he can be seen with tentacles. From there, a YouTube web series called Marble Hornets ran with all the Slender Man talk online and made videos surrounding this mysterious internet creation. However, he was named the operator. Didn't go by Slender Man in that series. These internet stories started to get traction. Stories such as Slender Man stalking and abducting people, mainly children. As I mentioned at the top, in 2012, we were introduced to the very first game, Slender the 8 Pages. In that game, the player is lost in the middle of the woods late at night with an objective to collect 8 pages. The pages are completely spread out, and while you are searching, Slender is not far behind you. Sometimes he'll teleport in front of you. You can't fight him as all you have equipped is a flashlight, and be thankful for that. The bad news? If left on for an extended period of time, the batteries in your flashlight will die, and most likely, so will you. Don't jog long either. You'll tire out and move slower. Collecting 8 pages sounds simple, but this game is anything but easy. The difficulty rises the longer it takes you to find the pages. Static appears when your character sees Slender, and the static will increase the closer he gets to you. Staring at Slender or allowing him to get to you will end the game, but if you somehow collect all 8 pages, Slender will still get you, but this is just leading to your ending. During the end cutscene after Slender Man gets you, the player wakes up in the forest, but this time, it's daylight. Roll the credits. Not bad for a free indie horror game. Unfortunately, from here, Slender Man is brought into the real world. On May 31st, 2014, 2 12-year-old girls stabbed their classmate 19 times. When asked what their motive was, they said they were afraid the Slender Man would come for their families if they didn't kill their classmate. One of the girls also claimed that Slender Man watches her. By a miracle, the victim survived the 19 stab wounds, and the 2 girls that did it have been charged. A documentary about this awful situation was released in 2016 titled, Beware the Slender Man. In 2013, a sequel to Slender the 8 Pages released. This game titled Slender the Arrival. A more story-driven game this time. Once again, you're only carrying a flashlight, but you go beyond the woods. First, you encounter a house that looks to have been ransacked. Through the sequel, you learn that Kate, who owns the home in the beginning, is the woman that you played as in the first Slender the 8 Pages. Now you play as her best friend Lauren. With the goal of finding Kate, Slender Man has already begun his stalking. If you look out the windows of the house, Slender Man can be seen, and it's only warning you for what's to come. It's got the jump scares, it's got the atmosphere, and some are quite harsh when criticizing Slender the Arrival. It took the simple mechanics of the original game and gave it a little more depth with bigger areas to explore while being chased. Even with all the fan-made games over the years about Slender Man, Slender the Arrival, in my opinion, proves to be the superior Slender game. A year later, once again, in reality, another incident in September of 2014 took place. A 14-year-old girl allegedly set her family's home ablaze. Police reported she had visited sites that had Slender Man stories. Crazy how wildly popular this fictional character became just after an edited photo. A documentary, tragedies, video games, to the big screen in 2018, yes, a Slender Man movie was released in theaters, and to be honest, I expected better. Quite the disappointment. Regardless, Slender holds a place in pop culture history. Even the Endermen in the insanely popular game Minecraft were inspired by him. But you know, we've heard of Momo, we've heard of Siren Head. It's just Slender Man is the spookiest in my opinion. I once went to a local haunted attraction, and we were on the hayride, and nothing shook me more than when I saw one of the actors emerge from the dark woods on stilts, dressed as Slender Man. A memory I still talk about often. So is Slender Man real? No. Could there be a tall, slender-like man with tentacles roaming the woods at night? I know I wouldn't care to find out. But the thing to remember out of all of this is just when it gets dark, stay out of the woods. Because there's that slight, slender chance he could be out there.
Friday the 13th, we now have to title it the 1989 video game, because of the new one that just released, which we'll get to in just a moment. But Friday the 13th, 1989 was released in February of 1989. It's a survival horror game published by LJN. Now let's set the game up. We have children staying at the camp. You and your 6 camp counselor friends are watching over the kids when all hell breaks loose and Jason decides to show up. Players control one of 6 camp counselors, each varying levels of speed, rowing, and jumping abilities. The goal is to find and defeat Jason Voorhees 3 times. A timed alarm appears at certain times, requiring to hurry and find Jason before he kills one or more children or another counselor. You must use the map to navigate your way to Jason's location, or switch to the counselor being attacked and defeat him. Sounds easy, right? Wrong. One thing that throws everything off is the map is backwards. If you walk right, you're going left on the map. That's a real pain. But if all counselors or children die, the game is over. And I recommend that you give it a shot, because it is not the best game. I know to some they have labeled it as one of the worst games of all time. I don't think it's one of the worst, but I'm probably going to give it a 1 out of 5. I hate to do it, but it's not very good either. It's not that, I mean, it's not bad. Yeah, it's bad. It's a 1 star.
The Resident Evil 2 remake will most likely go down as one of the greatest games in the Resident Evil franchise, and maybe one of the greatest games ever made by Capcom. The story takes place in September 1998, and seeing that the game has been remade 20 plus years later, they have done a very good job to keep things looking like it's 1998. For example, a resident of Raccoon City isn't going to be getting bit and tweeting about it. That would just be nonsense. Anyway, the game is fantastic, and I'm currently playing through as Claire on my second run. My first run with Leon was a trip. Why? Because Mr. X. Mr. X only appeared in the original game during the second playthrough. Not this time. He harassed me. I definitely got Nemesis vibes, and getting away from him is easier said than done. The sound of his boots in the other room while you're hiding is heart-pounding, so don't stay put for too long because he'll find you. The visuals, the controls, it's a beauty. I got the deluxe edition, and with that you have the option to play the new soundtrack or the original, and I'll admit, majority of my playthrough was the original music, but I did hear the new soundtrack, and both are phenomenal. I'm not a fan of the controls that we had for Resident Evil 4, and honestly I was worried that we may have those controls for this game, since it's the same over-the-shoulder look. Thankfully that was not the case. The original Resident Evil 2 was good, but this is just great. I felt like we were able to know the characters better as well. For example, we get more of Ada than we ever did in the original Resident Evil 2, and she grows on you. I won't lie, I never cared about Ada until this game. I'm confused though. I couldn't tell if they were trying to create a relationship with Leon and Ada or Leon and Claire. He's a very flirtatious, handsome dude, and he freaking knows it. I've heard a few fans are unhappy with Ada kissing Leon, but I think it adds to the emotions. So towards the end, they give us the scene where Leon tries to hold on to Ada before dropping her to what seems to be her death, and a little later they confirm to the player that she is indeed still alive and helps out in a massive way. So I like that. That is an upgrade from the original Resident Evil 2. I will say I had one very small disappointment in this game. Marvin. We got to hang around Marvin longer than we ever did in the classic 1998 game, but the original scene when Marvin turns was a big one, and I felt like it kind of came across weak in the remake. But hey, if that's my only complaint, that's not bad. The police station is my favorite location in all of Raccoon City, and the remake done a fantastic job reimagining it. Walking into the STARS room brought back so many memories. After going underground, you can actually make your way back to the police station and grab a few things you couldn't before. It's not mandatory, but I recommend taking the time to do so. This is a no-brainer, but obviously the boss battles are better. I played on normal and had just enough ammo and a few extra herbs just to get the job done. Ammo I felt was very hard to come by, and at some point you gotta save ammo, so maybe take 1 or 2 shots to stagger an enemy just enough to get around them rather than unload 10 bullets into a zombie's head. What I love the most is, it's a different game, same story, same setting, just done better. The only thing that sucks about getting a good remake is the original getting forgot about. So for example, after Resident Evil 1's remake came out, I can't go back to the classic. Same can be said for the new Spyro and Crash trilogies. If you had to choose, you would just pick the cleaner looking versions. So will the original Resident Evil 2 get forgotten about? Who knows? But after playing this, I can't imagine what Capcom could do with a remake of the third game. Capcom took a classic and made it 100 times better. We waited a long time for this game to be remade, and after playing it, it was worth every single second. It's been a long time since Raccoon City was wiped off the map, but man does it feel good to be back.
Indie horror games are some of the scariest games out there. I personally love the PlayStation 1 styled horror games, and After Midnight 2 is exactly that. You play as Mary, who has been hired to look after Drake for the night as his parents are headed to a party. The parents, Judith and Scott, look like they're straight out of a 1996 video game, but Mary's got that PS2 Kingdom Hearts look. They mention to Mary that they left a paper with tasks for her to do, and not to worry, they will overpay her. So I'm watching your kid and your house on Halloween, and you also want me to do your around the house work. I want the money up front. The mother reminds Mary that it is Halloween and she set candy out for her to give to the trick-or-treaters, and off they go. After taking control, you see Drake is playing on his Goni station. I like it. As you explore the house, you see that there is access to the upstairs area. Really, nothing is off limits here. You can even go outside to the front yard and to the sidewalk. Head over to the kitchen table and you'll find the task list. They want you to wash the dishes, sweep the back porch, and take out the garbage and give candy to the kids. Unbelievable. After a few minutes of doing the task, we have our first trick-or-treater. After the kid leaves, you shut the door to find Drake is now missing. He eventually pops out and scares you. But what I found more scary than the jump scare that he gives you was Drake looks like a grown freaking man. He looks 35 and is wearing a onesie. Mary isn't thrilled with his joke and sends him to bed. Mary continues to do tasks and greet the trick-or-treaters, but then you hear a motorcycle pulling up. It's the boyfriend, Steve. This guy looks like a tool, and we're falling right in line with how the classic horror movies play out. You know darn well he's victim number one. He wants to have fun, but she tells him that he's gotta behave. And the exact opposite starts to happen. Mary has straddled Steve on the couch and they are at first base sucking face. And you know how the killers feel about people getting down and nasty. We see our apparent killer standing outside watching from the window. The screen fades to black and it's now raining and storming outside. Mary must have fallen asleep on the couch and quickly realizes as she awakens that Steve is gone. What did I tell you? The trick-or-treaters continue to come for candy even in the storm. And hey, costume of the night? Little Michael Myers. Little dude even has the walk down. Your search for Steve is unsuccessful. Another ring at the door, but this time it's not a trick-or-treater. It's our killer, Mr. Pumpkin Man. He's covered in blood and wants to play a game. He says there's only you and the boy in the house and the phone line is cut. If you leave the house, I'll kill you. He tells her if she wants to survive, she must kill the boy Drake. When the church bell rings, it'll be midnight, and if Drake is still alive, he's coming back and he's gonna kill them both. This just got super intense. So let's take a step back and put all of this together. This is now feeling like a slasher movie similar to Halloween, but with a twist. You can't kill off Drake because when his parents find him, they're coming for Mary. Her life will be ruined. Oh, and he's a kid. I mean, we can't forget that. So until the church bell rings, I'd be preparing to fight this guy. I'm barricading doors, I'm finding weapons, it's on. At this point in the game, I'm terrified. Drake overheard everything and is following me around, and I just know that church bell is gonna ring any time now. I love the atmosphere. I was legit creeped out, and it doesn't help that I'm very mediocre with a mouse and keyboard. The church bell sounds and the lights go out. Remember Steve, the biker boyfriend who was supposed to behave? We finally have confirmation. He's dead. You have multiple endings. Never hide Drake in the garage, you will both end up dead. If you choose this path, take Mary upstairs and hide under the bed. After moments of suspense, the Pumpkin Man checks under the bed and the game ends with her screams. Text lets you know Mary's body was found under the bed and Drake was found in the garage, split in half. Now, if you hide Drake upstairs, he lets you know that his dad has a gun hidden in the wardrobe. I feel this is something Drake could have told us 10 minutes ago, but that's good to know. Grab the gun. The killer doesn't waste any time and he's already upstairs. As you shoot him, he will run off. He'll continue to jump scare you, but every time you shoot him, he's running. Eventually, he falls and bleeds out. This is the best ending. It does let you know, classic Halloween, there was no body found. So there's that thought that he is still out there somewhere. For the most messed up ending, you can do as just the killer asked you to. You can find a knife and kill the kid Drake. The police arrive to arrest Mary as the Pumpkin Man watches from the distance and walks off. For an indie horror game that maybe lasts around 20 to 25 minutes, it's a nice short fright, and it's cheap. It nails the jump scares and the intensity of waiting for the killer to show up after that church bell sounds. It serves its purpose of being a horror game. 616 Games created a throwback babysitter horror experience, and they done it well.
Resident Evil 3 Nemesis released September 22, 1999, developed by Capcom. Out of the series, this one is probably my favorite, with the remake of the first game slightly behind it. Resident Evil 3 takes place just 2 months after the mansion incident, and it begins one day before Resident Evil 2. The player takes control of Jill Valentine, a returning character from Resident Evil 1. Almost all, and I mean all, of Raccoon City citizens have been transformed into zombies by the outbreak of the T-virus created by Umbrella. The game plays the same as the 2 games that came before it, but we have some new features. One of the features gives you the opportunity at different times in the game to make decisions. I'm not sure if there is a right or wrong decision, but it steers the story in a slightly different way. Slightly meaning the path to the end will be different, but the game ends the same way every time. The biggest new feature for the game is your worst nightmare, and he won't go away. Resident Evil 3 introduces Nemesis, a monster program to target surviving STARS members and anyone who witnessed Umbrella's experiments. This is why he can be heard saying STARS repeatedly. I feel that Resident Evil 3 is the scariest Resident Evil of the first 3 games, and Nemesis is a big component of that. He shows up out of nowhere, and the best advice I can give you is to just run. Don't fight him until you absolutely have to. Not knowing when he's going to show up makes you nervous as you progress through the game, and when he does, it's like an instant heart attack. Also, the fact that you most likely are the only one alive, it's terrifying. So this game you get to see a lot of Raccoon City, where in Resident Evil 1 you were confined to the mansion for the majority of the game, and in Resident Evil 2 you got a taste of Raccoon City, with exploring the police station, a few streets, and the sewers. In Resident Evil 3, you explore uptown, downtown, the police station, the city hall, the clock tower, the hospital, Raccoon Park, and more. Resident Evil 2 and 3 actually mesh together. Supposedly you can see the burning truck from the beginning scene of Resident Evil 2 in Resident Evil 3. But the thing I find to be the best is Brad Vickers is a STARS member, and actually flew the helicopter at the end of Resident Evil 1. Well, he meets his death very early in Resident Evil 3 at the hands of Nemesis, but the coolest part about it is if you start Resident Evil 2 and get to the police station without picking up a single item, a zombie form of Brad can be found. So this is leading us to know that the first encounter with Nemesis in Resident Evil 3 happened before the crash at the beginning of Resident Evil 2. I know that sounds a little complicated, but if you really think about it, it's so awesome. If you kill Zombie Brad in Resident Evil 2, he has a key where you can get different outfits. Resident Evil 3 did something similar. If you beat the game, you get the boutique key, and you can choose different outfits for Jill as well. Also, after completing the game, you unlock a mini-game called The Mercenaries. Jill isn't the only playable character. You get to play as Carlos at a certain point. Fans were a little disappointed in Resident Evil 3 because it didn't have scenarios A and B like Resident Evil 2, but it didn't bother me at all. I enjoy this game a lot, and it has a very high replay value in my opinion. Check it out. You can get it for PlayStation 1, also on PlayStation 3. If you go to the PlayStation Store, you can find it. It's also on Sega Dreamcast, Nintendo GameCube, and Microsoft Windows. Halloween just happens to be my favorite horror movie franchise. There's just something about the Michael Myers mask. It's so plain, it's so mysterious, it's so William Shatner. But it's perfect for a horror movie. The white mask illuminates in the dark and it's just awesome. But I'm not here to review the movies. Believe it or not, a Halloween game released for the Atari 2600 in 1983. It was published by Wizard Video Games. It's definitely rare. Rare as in you won't likely find it at your local game store, and if you do, consider yourself lucky. Reproduction carts have been made for this game, and the boxes are 1,000 times better. Some hate on reproduction carts, but for a game that's why not? I mean, the actual game goes for over $100, while a repro cart is about $25. On the actual cart, they stuck a white sticker on it and wrote Halloween with an orange marker. And it goes for over $100. Unless you're an Atari collector, just get the reproduction. So in the Atari 2600 Halloween game, you play the babysitter, which in the Halloween franchise would be Laurie Strode. You have to walk from screen to screen and save the kids. Now you only have 3 lives, and that is shown by the jack-o'-lanterns up top of the screen. So when Michael Myers appears, you have to be quick. If he kills you, you lose your head. And how about this? This game's got guts, because Michael Myers can kill the kids. But nothing really happens, though. I mean, the kids die, and like I said, you just keep playing. But if you're playing by scores, every time you save a kid, it increases your score at the bottom of the screen. I mean, for what the Atari 2600 offered, this honestly isn't bad for 1983. Nah, who am I kidding? This game's terrible. But too bad we didn't get a Halloween game for NES. It could have turned out like Friday the 13th, which would be the bad, or like Nightmare on Elm Street, which I thought was pretty good. Instead, Michael Myers wouldn't return to your home by console until 2014 when it was announced he would be a DLC add-on for Call of Duty Ghost. I was so excited for this idea, I bought Ghost just for it. But what did we get? We got a Michael Myers that looked like he stopped by a local barbershop in Haddonfield and asked for a frat boy haircut. I was highly disappointed. Fast forward to 2016 and Michael Myers became DLC for Dead by Daylight. Guess what I did? I bought the game just for this. It's honestly the best version of Myers in a game up until this point. I look at the games like the newest Friday the 13th and wish someone would do that with the Halloween franchise, but who knows? So until then, Dead by Daylight's the winner here.
Puppet Combo's Christmas Massacre puts you behind the knife as a killer Santa Claus. A physical release had just dropped and I can't recommend it enough. Puppet Combo, known for the PlayStation 1 style horror games, comes through with a Hotline Miami type of game this time around. We start things off Christmas of 1959. Larry is a young boy in a Catholic school and has just been told he isn't allowed to attend the Christmas party. Now we don't know exactly why, but it throws Larry off the edge. Once taking control of little Larry, you will notice in the bottom left corner a monitor system. Here you'll have to watch your noise and shadow levels. Obviously doing so will make sure you don't get caught. In control of Larry, you'll need to head down the stairs and sneak into the kitchen to the right of the party. After finding the knife, massacre number 1 can begin. Killing the nun who told you not to come to the party scares off the other kids, but now you chase them down one by one, and the rest is history. The game fast forwards 20 years into the future. It's December 23rd, 1979. Larry has a rundown house, or shack, and get ready. He takes orders from his talking Christmas tree.
I was thinking, a lot of people have been naughty this year. I need you to go out and kill. You must kill, and keep on killing Larry. Punish everybody who has been naughty.
Yes, this is odd, and it's pretty obvious that Larry has some issues. However, when I first saw this, it reminded me of a Christmas decoration I had as a kid back in the late 90s. I give you Douglas Fir, the talking Christmas tree. Now I have to feel this was some kind of inspiration here. You would put a cassette in this tree and it would talk and sing. And we used to get a kick out of this thing singing Elvis. But anyway, Larry's Christmas tree orders him to kill. So Larry puts on his Saint Nick costume and heads to do so. Just like Hotline Miami, every stage will have to be planned out. Stealth and speed is the key. If you are spotted and the victims escape, you must repeat that level again. After slaughtering everyone in the first random house, Larry returns home to his talking Christmas tree, and it praises him for his work. On to the next day, December 24th, Christmas Eve, Larry heads into the back of a grocery store and makes sure nobody survives. After returning home, the tree tells Larry that while he was gone, it captured a teenager and he should kill him. Larry obeys his Christmas tree's wishes. I know, this is also odd. And he kills the teenager. Larry continues to kill, going to a house party and a movie theater. Eventually, the tree talks Larry into going back to his old Catholic school and burning it to the ground. Larry lights the entire building up with a flamethrower and learns that the nun who originally told him 20 years ago that he couldn't attend the party lived through the original massacre. He finishes the job this time and heads back home. Upon arriving home, the police are there and they arrest him. The talking tree apologizes to Larry and says that it had to cooperate with the FBI because it didn't want to go to jail. Your freaking Christmas tree sold you out. I love this. This is amazing. Larry was convicted of 36 counts of first-degree murder, and as much as I loved the tree turning him in, I don't believe the tree was ever real. It was the voice in Larry's head all along. Just like the tree didn't go out and capture a teenager, Larry did that. If you fail on the very first mission, a voice tells Larry to find a knife in the kitchen. That same voice is the voice of the tree. I myself am not actually that great at stealth games. but I had quite an interesting time planning out each stage. Many times I failed, but a quick reset got me right back into it. Playing as the killer is actually refreshing, because usually in puppet combo games, I'm playing as tense as possible waiting for jump scares. Look how much fun it was playing as Jaws in Jaws Unleashed. Sometimes change is good, and in this case, I really liked it. Puppet Combo has done this before in a previous game called Feed Me Billy, but I feel like they perfected it here. If I had any complaints, it would be the option of different weapons. You mainly use the knife, and at a certain point in the game you have the ability to throw it. As mentioned earlier, you also get a flamethrower at the end. An axe, a hammer, a crowbar, I don't know, just different variations I think would have been nice. You are graded at the end of each stage, so why not have some unlockable weapons? Outside of that, if you love Christmas and horror, what a game. Santa has been portrayed as a killer in many movies, but if you want to play a killer Santa in a video game, choose this one.
You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not cry. I'll tell you why. Santa Claus is coming to town.
Resident Evil 4 released as a GameCube exclusive in 2005. I remember playing Resident Evil 3 and seeing the theater sign, Biohazard 4 coming soon. That was a cool Easter egg, and it was exciting to know that a new game was coming for one of your favorite franchises. However, in 2005, my attention was set deep into the PlayStation 2, and Resident Evil 4 was the game that got away. Eventually, I got an Xbox 360, and Resident Evil 5 was on my radar. I'd completely forgot about the fourth title. I played Resident Evil 5 and was absolutely disappointed. Imagine going from Resident Evil 3 to Resident Evil 5. That's not how I knew this franchise. The complaints from the hardcore survival horror fans were coming in. We want horror, not action. After the disappointment of Resident Evil 5, I was talking to a friend who told me to play Resident Evil 4, and that I had missed out on the greatest, yes, he said the greatest Resident Evil yet. So by this point, I had a GameCube, but the game had been ported to the PS2. But I was in high school, I didn't have a job, I wanted to know if it was worth spending the saved up money I had. I didn't want another disappointment like the fifth game. I watched a few videos of the game and couldn't get past the action I was seeing. Now, when the game was being talked about, I'd see it in magazines, and it looked good. But now that I'm seeing video of it, Leon doing suplex wrestling moves and roundhouse kicks, it instantly turned me away. And I said, nope. We get to the year 2020. We're in a pandemic. If I'm ever going to give this game a shot, it was now. And I got it HD remastered on the PS4, and I played it to the finish. Man, I was wrong. Yes, Resident Evil 4 has some action aspects, however, it still had horror. The village setting in the beginning set the tone, but being surrounded by villagers who are infected by a mind-controlling parasite made me feel uneasy. I constantly felt hunted in this game. I knew he was there because what everyone speaks of when it comes to this game, the chainsaw guy. He appears multiple times and you're never ready. You hear the chainsaw starting up and it's go time. Put a plan together. Another part of this game that freaked me out were the monks, also known as zealots. They have a terrifying chant and walk around in black robes. Absolutely creepy. The enemies in the game are smarter than they've ever been before. If you want to try to conserve ammo by running, good luck. In the village, I had so many possessed villagers chasing me, I panicked and ran inside a house, blocked the door, ran up the steps, and went out on the roof. As I was collecting my thoughts and trying to put a plan together, the next thing I know, they broke in and are climbing out the window onto the roof to get me. Nightmares. These are nightmares. Anyway, let me get to the story itself. I love how at the beginning cutscene of the game, it uses footage from the first and third game, recapping the events of the outbreak in Raccoon City. It is now 2004, and Leon now works for the US government as an agent. He is set out on a mission to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley, who had been abducted by a cult. I'll leave it at that, because if you haven't played it, don't wait any longer. Don't be like me. I was fully interested in this story once I began, from the start to the finish. Leon goes through the frightening village, and the mission even leads him to a castle. I was on the edge of my couch the entire time. I felt they only gave me enough ammo to make it. There were times I was thinking, I'm almost out of ammunition, what am I gonna do? And thankfully, I'd come across some. We also were introduced to the merchant. What a likable guy. His sayings, still to this day, are favorites of the Resident Evil community.
I'll buy it at a high price. Got some rare things on sale, stranger. Is that all, stranger? Not enough cash, stranger. Got a selection of good things on sale, stranger.
Now that I have said so many nice things about this game, I will say this. Even though I enjoyed my playthrough, I enjoyed the difficulty, the boss battles, it's a really good Resident Evil game. I still believe, though, that this game started the decline of the franchise for the next 12 years. The action and horror felt 50-50 in RE4. But as the sequels came, the action took over the horror. When you hear Resident Evil, you don't think of a military shooter. You think of survival. And RE4 was good, but it ushered in Resident Action Adventure. In 2017, with the 7th major installment in the series, Capcom got this thing back on track. So yes, I was wrong. Resident Evil 4 is a really good game. But is it the best Resident Evil? In my opinion, no. Coming up on 10 years now, Five Nights at Freddy's released August 8th, 2014 as a point-and-click indie horror game. Since then, the franchise has become wildly popular with 10 main games and a variety of spin-offs. More recently, a very successful theatrical release. Five Nights at Freddy's takes place at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, based off the wildly popular family entertainment center, Chuck E. Cheese. Just like Chuck E. Cheese, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria seems to be the greatest place for children to have birthday parties and enjoy arcade games, not to mention the animatronics show. Many years ago, the animatronics at Chuck E. Cheese were a highlight of your afternoon entertainment. However, at Freddy's, the animatronics have become a problem. In the first game, the restaurant is preparing to shut down later in the year. There have been complaints of blood leaking from the animatronics as well as a horrid odor, but there's more to it. So let's get into the game. You have been hired as a night shift security guard. Your goal is to make it through 5 nights. Each night you are left with a phone recording by the previous night guard, basically establishing the rules. He explains that at night the animatronics are left in a free roaming mode, because their servos will lock up if they are turned off for too long. He also makes you aware that if they see you after hours, they won't recognize you as a person, but as an endoskeleton without its costume on. You then will be stuffed into an animatronic suit by the animatronics themselves. That's a lot to take in on your first day, but here we go. You have to survive until 6 a.m. Each night gets harder and you have to build a strategy.
The animatronics roaming the first game are Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Freddy. You start out with 100% power each night, but checking the cameras, using the lights, and shutting the doors will drain that power quickly. Bonnie and Chica come from the left and right doors, while Foxy usually goes left. Foxy is fast and the scariest in my opinion. He isn't active until the third night unless you provoke him by looking in the Pirate's Cove. Freddy comes to the office through the right door. Sounds a bit stressful, because it is. Not only are you trying to keep the animatronics out of the security office, you have to check the cameras, and when you're doing that, you're taking your eyes off the door. And once again, you gotta watch your power supply. If you somehow make it through all 5 nights, the game ends with you receiving a $120 paycheck. If you die on a certain night, let's just say night 4, they are generous enough to restart you on that night. Someone may ask, what makes Five Nights at Freddy's scary? Is it the jump scares? Of course it is. But I also think it has a lot to do with the environment. A place that is usually full of fun and laughter is seen in a different way once abandoned. Checking the cameras of this children-themed entertainment center just doesn't feel right. You soon discover how dark this place actually is by reading the newspaper prints on the walls. Kids vanish at local pizzeria. Bodies not found. 2 local children were reportedly lured into the back room during the late hours of operation at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza on the night of June 26th. While video surveillance identified the man responsible and led to his capture the following morning, the children themselves were never found and are presumed dead. Police think that the suspect dressed as a company mascot to earn the children's trust. 5 children now reported missing. Suspect convicted. 5 children are now linked to the incident at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where a man dressed as a cartoon mascot lured them into a back room. While the suspect has been charged, the bodies themselves were never found. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza has been fighting an uphill battle ever since to convince families to return to the pizzeria. It's a tragedy. So the children were murdered, stuffed into suits, and now haunt the animatronics. That's deep for a point-and-click video game that cost like $7.99 when it released. It may seem a bit repetitive, checking the cameras, lighting the doorways, shutting the doors, but by the 5th night, this game is intense, and it still holds up for a good scare. Like I said, many games came after, and its following is massive. As weird as it is, kids love Five Nights at Freddy's. You can tell the movie they tried to make it a horror movie, but also keep it kid-friendly. And if you even go to the toy aisle at Walmart, you'll find Five Nights at Freddy's action figures. Kids love it. Recently, Chuck E. Cheese had made the decision to rid of their animatronics. They claim it doesn't have anything to do with the release of Five Nights at Freddy's. But who knows? Maybe they know something that we don't.
Can't wait to meet you. So join the animatronic family. We open real soon. So try your best to hold on to sanity. Come get to know me. And you won't want to leave after tonight. Down here we're lonely. And we would love you to join us for a ride.
This evil Capcom creation first terrorized gamers in 1985 when it appeared in arcades. Only a year later, it would become available on the Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES version sold over 1.6 million copies worldwide. You play as Arthur, and you have to battle through 6 brutal stages, which can be seen on a map at the start of each stage. You are fighting to save the princess. I don't know what it is with these games. You got Mario having to save the princess. you've got Link having to save the princess, and now Arthur has to save the princess who was taken by Satan under Lucifer's command. I always thought Lucifer was Satan, but Capcom had different plans apparently. On your quest to save the princess, you face enemies such as zombies, red devils, flying knights, forest ghosts, dragons, and unicorns. Yes, unicorns. Now these unicorns aren't what you think. These things have taken steroids. They're huge, they're jacked. The biggest challenge of this torturous side-scroller is the amount of enemies and the pace that they are coming for you. You have enemies on the ground level and attacking through the air. You have multiple weapons to choose from, like a spear, a sword, a flame, which sucks, an axe, and a cross shield. The reason I say the flame sucks is because it has an arch when throwing it and you usually miss your enemy. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, it's 2 hits and you're dead. Arthur begins in his armor, gets hit once, he loses his armor, and only has his underwear to protect him. Hit the second time, and he turns into a pile of bones. You can find armor after getting hit, but good luck finding some. You are granted with unlimited continues. However, due to the difficulty, those continues don't mean anything. Make your way through each stage, collecting the key after defeating each gatekeeper at the end of each stage. Stage 6 is an absolute nightmare. Red devils everywhere. There used to be a myth that once said if you don't finish stage 6 with the cross shield, the game will send you back to stage 5. Unfortunately, I learned the hard way and found this to be true. How can this game brutalize you anymore? Just wait.
But wait! There's more! Hang on to your seat, baby! Cause this one's a screamer!
After beating 2 Satans at the end of stage 6, you have a one-on-one final showdown with Lucifer himself. Take him down with the shield, and watch the credits roll. I'm just kidding. Do you really think it would be that easy? No, a message on the screen reads, "This room is an illusion and is a trap devised by Satan. Go ahead dauntlessly, make rapid progress." At this point, you are sent back to the very beginning of the game. It's appalling. Who thought that this game wasn't hard enough? Now, to get the real true ending, you have to make it all the way back. And the game's harder on the second time through. After getting all the way back to the final fight with Lucifer and defeating him, you see Arthur and the princess reunite. I honestly look at this as an achievement, though. If you want to know if you're a good gamer, take up this challenge. I did about 8 years ago on my NES. Now, I've had people tell me, well, why didn't you just play through it and use save states? I understand that. And, me personally, for me to actually complete this, I would feel like I was cheating if I were using save states. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not coming at you if you want to play this game and use save states, because it is that brutal that I don't think save states is technically cheating. But just the way that I am, I needed to know if I could actually beat this game the way that it was intended to be. And I did. But this game, made by Capcom, is scarier than any Resident Evil game that Capcom's ever put out because of its difficulty. If you are willing to take on this challenge, good luck. So go ahead dauntlessly and make rapid progress. Developed by Supermassive Games, The Quarry released June 10th, 2022. These interactive horror games aren't for everybody. They are basically a movie, but you're steering the ship. Supermassive's previous game, Until Dawn, is a PlayStation 4 classic, but The Quarry? This is a monster of its own. Unlike Until Dawn, The Quarry has so many different paths, which is great for replay value.
Until Dawn's paths, for the most part, all end up in the same area. You may have killed a few off, but the story basically stays the same. The Quarry has 9 playable characters, and each character has 10 to 12 different ways to possibly die. According to Will Bales, the director of Supermassive Games, The Quarry has 186 different endings. That is insane. I mentioned 9 playable characters. Let me go through them without potentially spoiling anything. Laura is by far my favorite. I don't know why, but my priority in The Quarry was keeping her alive over everyone else. She isn't a follower, she's a leader, and I loved her character. Max is her boyfriend, and you only play as him once, maybe twice, but I dig his sense of humor. Emma is annoying, and she's the pretty popular type and comes across as the pot stirrer. Jacob is the immature frat boy type. I had mixed feelings for his character throughout the game. However, by the end, I liked Jacob. He can't let go of his summer fling with Emma, and she reminds him constantly. Caitlin is very unlikable early on. Her sarcastic, witty attitude creates a personality that doesn't personally sit well with me. However, as the game moves along, situations get rough, and I think the real Caitlin shows, and I prefer that version. Ryan I wasn't sure about. The dude seems quite weird in the beginning, but just another character that becomes more and more likable as you play. He also has a sarcastic personality from time to time, but it comes across as playful, where Caitlin's is just not. Dylan has a great sense of humor and reliable in some of the most tense moments of the game. Abigail was probably my second favorite. She is that backward, shy, somewhat quiet kind of girl. And Nick, the guy athlete type who comes off a bit awkward and shy. He and Abigail have feelings for one another, but both struggle to get their feelings out in the open. Promotion for The Quarry came across as an 80s slasher horror movie. Even the box art for the game points in that direction. If you watch the official announced trailer, not a lot is given, which is great because some movies and games give away too much in their trailers. I'm not going to get into spoilers because the game is still new, but I do at least want to set up the events of the game. In the opening cutscene, Laura and her boyfriend Max are driving to Hackett's Quarry, a summer camp where they have been hired as camp counselors. They crash into the woods after swerving off-road. The county sheriff helps pull them back to the main road and out of the dark, creepy, muddy woods. He seems a bit suspicious, but it's too early to tell. They explain that they wanted to arrive early to Hackett's Quarry, but the sheriff demanded that they stay at a nearby hotel for the night. After the awkward encounter, the couple decide to drive to the camp anyways. Once arriving, they are attacked by some kind of creature in the basement. It doesn't look good for Max, and Laura gets sedated by the sheriff that shows up in the nick of time. Angry that they didn't listen, the sheriff shoots to scare off the creature. Fast forward 2 months later, summer camp has come to an end. Here is where we meet the rest of the counselors. Max and Laura were no-call no-shows all summer, so that remains a mystery. The camp owner, Chris Hackett, played by David Arquette, seems very stressed about everyone leaving the camp on time. Jacob, who is trying to reignite his summer fling with Emma, decides to sabotage the vehicle so that they all can stay one last night. Chris Hackett, in a panic, tells them all to stay inside the lodge for the night, and they'll figure things out in the morning. Well, of course, these young camp counselors aren't going to listen. Not long into the night, all hell breaks loose. And now that's where I'm going to leave the story. I would have liked to see some more of David Arquette. By the promotion, it seemed as if he would play a much bigger role. And I mean, he does to a point, but his screen time is limited. The language was a bit much for my liking. I usually say I don't mind it if it makes sense, but to use profanity in every single sentence is a bit much. I love that they played off nostalgia with the VHS, 80s vibe, but the game takes place in current times. I think it would have made more sense if the timeline was placed in the 80s. When the story first starts to unfold, I wasn't too sure, but the deeper the story went, the more I got invested. There was even a situation in the game where my jaw dropped. If you like games like Little Hope and Until Dawn, this is for you. Decisions need to be made and quick-time events are present. Choose your own adventure books and video games have always been favorites of mine. My complaints are really just nitpicking, honestly. Here's an example. Why in the world would you include a 20-minute credit scene that cannot be skipped? That's brutal, man. I love the different outcomes, and my first playthrough was not perfect, but I was happy with it. Out of all the endings, unfortunately, they don't show what happens to the remaining survivors after this horrific night. They do leave you with a scene showing who did survive and who didn't to the tune of Daydream Believer by the Monkees, which was a nice touch if you ask me. The Quarry has many very good reviews, and I recommend it as well. Whether it's the 80s or the 2020s, one thing certainly hasn't changed, and that is summer camp just isn't a good idea.
How did Resident Evil 5 manage to become the #1 selling game in the Resident Evil franchise? Better yet, it's the second best-selling Capcom game of all time, right behind Street Fighter 2. I don't think that it's hard to figure out, but the name will sell itself. I'm not a fan of this game because I'm a classic Resident Evil fan. How did you go from searching a creepy mansion and roaming the halls of a zombie-infested police station to battling people infected by parasites in Africa during the brightest time of day? It's daylight. What happened to the atmosphere of Resident Evil? This completely took me out of the game at the very beginning, and I actually got this game when it released in 2009. I was super excited, but when that first cutscene came through, I kept thinking, okay, it's daylight, not a big deal. But no, majority of the game takes place in broad daylight. The story, however, stays true to the original events of Resident Evil as Chris Redfield makes his return to the series. Chris first appeared in Resident Evil 1 and is now a member of the fictional Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance. Wow. Say that 5 times. He is joined in this game by Sheva, a new character to the franchise. The mission they are on is to stop Ricardo Irving before he can sell a bioorganic weapon under the table. That's when they take things in an alternate route. Sheva is now his new sidekick since we are to believe Jill Valentine is dead. RE5 is a third-person shooter and Capcom introduces its new co-op feature. Players have the option to have a friend tag along and control Sheva. If that's not your thing, don't worry, the AI will control her, and truthfully, to me, I didn't think she was much of a burden. She doesn't really get in your way. However, Resident Evil 5's 2007 E3 trailer was criticized by many who saw a white main character killing a lot of black enemies. Many still think to this day Sheva was only added to shut down any racism claims. It's not a terrible game, as a matter of fact, it looks really good and plays very well. It's just not Resident Evil. This game is action-packed and became very distant to survival horror. If I wanted to play a game like this, I'd just play Gears of War. I just feel that it's a Gears of War knockoff. After the release of RE5, Capcom had said, looking at the marketing data for survival horror, the market is small, compared to number of units action games sell. They also went on to say, a survival horror Resident Evil doesn't seem like it'd be able to sell those kinds of numbers. Now, obviously, we all know that sales are #1 priority, but you have to make your fan base happy. RE5 and RE6 sold very well because of the name, but don't hold a very good reputation with the fan base. And after a while, people are going to realize that the series isn't what it used to be. So thankfully they got back on track with Resident Evil 7, which was amazing, and with the RE2 remake, I don't see Capcom straying far again from what they once knew. So to put a bow on RE5, it'll always be a disappointment to me, and that's my opinion, but if you like it, cool. I actually like the story, all the way to finishing off Wesker. However, I wouldn't have had Sheva do it, though. That belongs to Jill. Hand Jill the rocket launcher and give the fans the proper finish. Seeing that Sheva never returns to the franchise after 5, this just seems empty. Anyway, Chris is jacked to the gills and is punching freaking boulders now, and I think we all can agree it's a good game, but too much action, not enough horror. Choo Choo Charles released in 2022 as an indie horror game developed by 2-Star Games. You play as a monster archivist that receives a call from your buddy Eugene to come take care of Charles. Choo Choo Charles, the evil spider locomotive that has been terrorizing the residents of an island called Araneum. Once meeting up with Eugene, I couldn't believe the neck on this guy. He leads you to the train that you'll be using throughout the entire game. Also, I don't know how old Eugene is, but my guy is in great shape. Imagine trying to play tag with him. He's never gonna be it. He's so fast. Once getting your train on the tracks, Charles shows up early at quite a surprise. This ain't Thomas the Train. This is a nightmare. Charles hits your train, causing Eugene to fall out, and Charles straight up bodies him. Before Eugene dies, he tells you to find the eggs and find his son. We'll come back to this. Throughout the game, you gain different weapons that are interchangeable to battle Charles when he suddenly attacks. As the game progresses, Charles hangs around longer, so you'll need to build up your train by using scrap parts found spread out all over the island. You can spend them to increase your speed, health, damage, and armor. There are side missions to complete if you'd like. This is a great way to get even more scrap and learn more about the people who actually live on this island. You're given a map screen that shows you the path of the train tracks. You can change this path by pulling a lever. The map also indicates where the missions are. Once finding Eugene's son Paul, he tells you the plan to eliminate Charles for good. However, they need you to execute it. You have to find 3 of the special glowing eggs, and once you obtain them, this summons Charles in his final form. Hell Charles. After the battle, Paul has set explosives on a bridge and sets them off as Charles passes over it. Charles then falls, landing face first, killing him on wooden spikes. The credits begin immediately. This was such an awesome ending. Usually I would want more after the death of the main villain, but it's a satisfying end. Following the end credits, deep in a cavern, you see another spider train egg that remains. But then, the camera pans out to reveal hundreds more remain. The residents don't know it yet. They're going to have to burn this island to the ground. A full playthrough will probably only last you about 2 hours. For what it is, I find this to be a great time though. If it were any longer, it may start to feel repetitive. Choo Choo Charles isn't a full-on horror game with jump scares around every corner. The moments that are most intense are when you hear Charles's whistle coming from a distance. It's letting you know he's coming. And being away from your train and having Charles show up is a whole other story. I was screaming my head off trying to hide from him. Or when heading into the mines, you have to find the eggs. You must try to do so without being seen by the cultists. The cultists are led by the mining company owner, Warren Charles III, who is protecting these eggs. If I could have changed anything, it would have been during these stealthy parts. Maybe having things to hide in if you're seen, or being able to peek around walls, or even crouch. Anytime I got seen, I just had to run. You can lose them, but it doesn't happen often. Some will complain that the characters' mouths don't move while talking, but I'm just happy the game has voiceover. Not every game has to feel like a AAA title to be good. I love the rainy gray setting that it has. It gives that feel that this island isn't going to clear up until its problem gets solved. I always say graphics are not everything. And honestly, this looks like it could have been a game from the PS2 original Xbox generation. It's a fun game though, and it's available basically on everything: PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo.